Tonight we're studying Exodus chapter 16. Last week we read a bit of anticipation about this as we saw a couple things about the provision of God, that He gave us water, and He provided water in one way and or another, and that was great, and we're really happy that God did that for us. And the first thing you need in sustenance is air, and the second thing you need is water. You can get along without food and water for up to 3 days. But after 3 days, you need water. Your body, especially in the Sinai desert, the wilderness, you will not get along without water after 3 days. And God provided that. But then the next thing you need is food. So air, water, food. Those are in the natural. But God anticipated that whole story and said, you really need one more thing first, and that was freedom and relationship with me. So God gave us that as He delivered us out of Egypt. And then we hit the Red Sea, we escaped, we had, if you will, fresh air on the other side of the Egyptian slaughter, and then water, and now tonight, manna. Well, let's read some. Exodus 16, verse 22. Now on the sixth day, they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for each one. When all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, then he said to them, this is what the Lord meant. Tomorrow is a Sabbath observance, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake, boil what you will boil, and all that's left over, put aside to be kept until morning. So they put it aside until morning, as Moses had ordered, and it did not become foul, nor was there any worm in it. Moses said, eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will be none. So that's chapter 16. It really does flow into 17, but I'm going to leave us hanging so that we can talk about that next week. But chapter 16, to me, is one beautiful passage of God's provision. He is ever caring enough to provide for us what we need. Not what we want, but what we need. Each of you has had conversations with God, some over and over again, some even today, saying, God, I would like X. I would like something that I don't have today. Your wife just came back from overseas, right? Yeah. I would like my wife to come back from overseas safely, right? You prayed something like that. I would like a wife, some of you might be saying. I would like a husband, some of you might be saying. I would like children. I would like my children to grow up and be good, godly people. So we tell God the things we want. I would like, or I want, or we rarely say, God, I need. I need you to come through and give me healing, because we know that if healing doesn't come, something else will come, and even that means we will win. I think of, and I watched the 1.5-hour memorial service this week that took place last Thursday for young Sean Trank. Sean was 28 years old and had been in service with the Lord for a few years. He'd been married a little over 2 years. He was hit 9 months ago with a very aggressive type of lung cancer, though he never smoked a day in his life and didn't hang around people who did. And for whatever reasons, not singular reason, God saw fit to terminate his life a 1.5 weeks ago. There were people praying all over the globe, God, we want you to heal Sean. We want this. His wife was praying that. He was praying it. His brother was praying that. And yet, towards the end, we were saying, nevertheless, whatever your will is. Now we say, but God's will is that we should live long and prosper. Oh no, that was Mr. Spock on Star Trek. But we think, but the Bible says if you obey your parents, you'll live long in the land. It says that. It's the only commandment of the 10 with promise. And Sean was a good, obedient child. Why didn't he live long? He was married just 2 years. Why didn't his wife get to have children with him and a long life together with him? How should I know? What I do know is that our wants and our needs are often different. And though we said clearly, worldwide, what we wanted, God gave us what we needed. And Sean went home to be with God, and it was a gorgeous memorial service. I've never seen one online before, and it was beautiful on so many levels. the testimony of his sister-in-law, of his brother. They read various comments. David Garrett, who works with Jews for Jesus in San Francisco and who was a mentor to him on many levels, gave a beautiful eulogy. A lot of people spoke. Well, we said we want, but God knew what we needed. Now, I have a hard time with that. I imagine some of you do too. Because why did they make promises 2 years ago to love and cherish one another till death do they part if it was just going to be such a short and quick one? I don't know. Humility demands that we say, I don't know. And some say, what's the reason? As if there's only one. I think there might be dozens of reasons about which we're clueless. What does the book of Exodus, what does the whole Bible teach? That at the end of the day, we trust God. End of the day, God is God and we're not, and he gets to be God, and I'm going to trust him as God in my circumstance, in your circumstance. In all of our circumstances, we trust God. Now that is not que sera, sera. Whatever will be, will be. Doris Day sang it, and you remember the song from early 60s. And it's a common misunderstanding of trust. Trusting God doesn't mean fatalism, where we throw up our hands and say, whatever will be, will be. That's not faith. Faith is active participation in the will of God. It says, God, I'm going to express what I feel. You express what you feel, and let's have a conversation. Let's have a relationship. I'm not going to be a passive kind of guy. I'm active in conversation with God. That's what he wants. Even grumblings get heard by him. Now that's remarkable in our text. Look at it in verse number 1, 2. Look at this. And throughout the text, that the whole congregation, verse 2, of Israel are grumbling against Moses and Aaron, as if Moses and Aaron were responsible for their difficulties. Now they've been traveling for 1 month, right? Verse 1 tells us that they've left, that they're there on, and the snapshot is on the 15th day of ER, Nisan ER, the second month. They left on the 15th day of Nisan, a month earlier. And the pinpointed nature of verse 1 is interesting to me as well. Moses is writing these specific locations, which were known to them, but not to us today. We really don't know where these are. And I read about a man named Yochanan Acharoni, who was a 1950s archaeologist, who tried to pinpoint all the locations of the wilderness of sin. There are 5 names for this wilderness in the Torah. Sinai and Sin obviously are related. We don't know the etymology, but somehow they're related. Paran, the original name of the whole Sinai Peninsula. Just different things. But we don't know where's Kadesh Barnea. We don't know where all these things are. And he tried to find them archaeologically and was frustrated, though he said he found what looked like what we call Mount Sinai, which is only called Sinai in the book of Shemot. So look, cities sometimes built on top of old cities, and sometimes they're a mile away or 2 miles away, which may be insignificant when you're talking Sydney. But when you're talking a little tiny village town outside of Sydney, it really could be distinct in matter, right? Windsor is only a certain length. It's not a big town. Richmond, smaller yet. And so if it's a mile east of Richmond proper, then you've got a different Richmond. Does that make sense? But if you say Sydney and you get Balcombe Hills instead of Lane Cove, nobody's going to worry about it. Right, because it's all one big conglomerate. But here's the people, verse 2, grumbling against Moses and Aaron. The Hebrew word is lun, vayilonu. It is clearly, it's used over and over again in the text. And it is sometimes called murmuring, most of the time grumbling. It is not a happy thing, and yet God listens even to that. I like that about God. If I'm the dad in this story, I'm saying, kids, you grumble, have a nice day. Good luck with lunch. But God provides because he knows what they need. He knows that we need food. Here they are in verse 3 saying, why'd you bring us out here? We could have died back there by the hand of God. At least there we had we had hamburgers. We had lunch. Pots of meat.
McDonald's.
Well, it was better than McDonald's. Pots of basar, pots of good food. We ate bread until we were full, and you brought us out here to kill us with hunger. Is that why Moses brought them out? What was the point? What did he kept saying over and over again to Pharaoh? that we might gather and worship out there to the Almighty. So the people were kind of letting their stomach be their God at that moment, which if you've ever been hungry, or as the kids say, starving between meals, I'm starving, I haven't had my afternoon snack. But here they were 3 days out, maybe a month out, maybe they had taken some food, I think they did, and they were running out. Their resource was depleting, and now they're looking for something. Where's lunch? Moses, what'd you bring us out here for? Thanks a lot, buddy. I think I mentioned to you when I got back from Russia a few weeks ago that this was the feeling that I kept experiencing all over Moscow, that people who had experienced communism, and it was bad, have now for the last 2 decades been experiencing on-your-own-ism, nicknamed capitalism, and that's not any good for them either, except for the multiple number of billionaires and increasing number of millionaires in the land of Russia, in Moscow particularly. Most people, though, are just eking out a living, barely scraping by, and they're not happy. And I think they probably would turn to Mr. Putin if they had the option and say, thanks a lot, buddy. What'd you bring us out here for? That we might starve? That we might die in this wilderness you call Moscow? I didn't understand this text until I was there. That people would rather have had the bad days under communism, because at least then they knew where their potato was coming from. They did have to stand in a queue for an hour to get that potato. Did you ever do that? Yeah. Okay, you never had to do it yourself, though, but your mother did. I mean, I heard stories over and over again. Under Yeltsin, it was terrible. Under, Khrushchev, it was terrible. But at least we had food. So you sometimes cash in on something predictably provided rather than freedom, which is terribly off-putting and fear-bringing. I spoke to a Jewish woman today up in Queensland. I didn't realize until 20 minutes into the conversation that we'd spoken many years ago. And I wondered why her name was in my telephone when I called her back on a landline. And I thought, I've talked to you before. And she said, oh yes, and reminded me of it. And all of a sudden it came back to me. She is a Jewish woman and was becoming interested, believing, considering Jesus for herself. You know the story. And should I believe, should I not believe? And she was, what Yeshua said, counting the cost. And what was the cost for her? It's the same now as it was several years ago. She said, I'm worried that I would be ostracized from the Jewish community. And I thought, you can be ostracized without faith in Yeshua by the Jewish community for any number of reasons. You don't need Jesus to be the point of contact. But as I pressed her a little bit more, I found out that the reason she was worried about ostracism was provision. That is, that some of her bills were being paid by the rabbi. Oh, and if you admit that you believe in Yeshua, he will not just cut you off in a social setting, but he'll cut you off in a financial way, and you're going to be on your own. That's all she knew, and she didn't want to admit faith. I said, there are other people out there in Queensland who believe in Yeshua, who might kind of be part and parcel of your community of faith, with whom you could walk this out. The rabbi's not the only gatekeeper. He's the gatekeeper to certain wallets there in the Jewish community, but there are other communities. And she'd never processed that until today. So here she was, fearful to admit that she was believing in Yeshua. Why? Because better the devil you know. Well, I think she's over that hurdle a little bit. We'll see. And we'll see if the community of faith steps up to help her. But all that to say, verse 3 makes sense in light of those who have a history, though filled with slavery. What else did we grumble about for hundreds of years in Egypt? What was our grumble? Yeah, making bricks, or having to take the bricks that they made and build store cities for Pharaoh and live without freedom. We grumbled then, we grumbled now, we're very good at grumbling. Verse 4, then the Lord said to Moses, all right, I'll rain bread from heaven for you. What a great picture, isn't it? That he's going to send it down and you won't ever really see it. because you're going to go out in the morning and there it will be, like the morning dew. So is it rain or is it dew? I don't know, but it's there. I don't really care how it got there. And you can gather a day's portion every day. God says, verse 4, that I may test them whether they walk in my Hebrew instruction. What do you guess? Torah. That's the word. So what is the test when he sends manna? It sounds like I'm going to send manna down for you. I'm going to send bread, lechem, for you so that you can have food. It sounds like he's not going to test us. Why would he send food? So that we could eat, so that we'd be happy, so that we'd live life fully, right? That's what it sounds like. That's not what he says. I'm going to send bread to test you, to see if you walk in Torah. So what is the test? Twofold. And we failed both times. What's the failure? To obey what? So take 1 day's worth every day, except on Friday, on Yom Shishi, so that you gather twice as much then. Simple instructions. Always trusting God to be our provider. I'm going to give you water, that was last week. I'm going to give you bread, and I'm going to give you Shabbat. Shabbat is equal to the provision of manna and mayim. How beautiful is that? Now, this is the first time in the Bible the word Shabbat is used. You think, well, no, wait a minute. Back in Genesis. No, it doesn't say Shabbat. It says the seventh day. The first record of the word Shabbat. So this is a test for the next 60 seconds. This is a test of the emergency broadcast system. I mean, when you hear that, this is a test. It's not the real thing. But friends, this is the real thing. He's going to give it to us that we might be tested whether we'd walk in Torah. And we failed both times. Verse 5, he says, on the sixth day, take twice as much. Meaning Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, bring in 1 day's worth. Friday, bring in 2 days. Saturday, don't bring in any days. Well, there won't be any out there on Saturday morning. Okay. And you will know, verse 6, that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt. This was always the point, that we might know God. It's ever the story of Scripture, that in a personal way we could know him. It's not so that we can obey him, though that is a function of knowledge. It's not so that we can say, I know about him in some academic fashion. Oh yes, I've read the story, or my grandmother told me that there was a God, and I can get it right on an academic exam. But that we might know, there it is the word yada, that we might know, like husband and wife, that we might know, like in a personal way, God himself. So everything he does is designed to get us in relationship with him. And anything else is just way less than that. When you hear people talk about Torah as a way to please God, they miss it. When you hear about Torah as a way to say, we're going to represent God, they miss it. But Torah was given that we might know God. And then that we're tested and that we might pass the test, of course. But that's always secondary. Verse 7, he hears your grumblings against or on top of the Lord. And what are we that you grumble against us? I love that. It sounds, verse 7, so New York. Can you hear Moses saying, what are we? What are you picking on me for? Your problem's with God, not with me. Leave me alone. All right, so he said, God's heard you. And verse 8, this is going to happen when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and bread to the full in the morning. He's promising that you're going to have the very things you had about which you're grumbling when you were back in Mitzrayim. So Moses said to Aaron, verse 9, so he says, say to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, come near before the Lord. He's heard your grumblings. And as Moses spoke, they looked toward the wilderness, and God appeared in the cloud. And God spoke to Moses, saying, all right, I've heard him. Tell them, at twilight you'll eat meat, in morning you'll be filled with bread. You'll know that I'm the Lord your God. Remember, that's the purpose. Whenever God does anything, it's so that we might know him. Sometimes people say, you've heard this, if God really wanted to be known, why wouldn't he just come down here right now and show himself? Why did he do it 2,000 years ago with that Jesus character?
People tell me that.
And you know, if he really wanted to be known, why doesn't he take out a big ad on TV? Or why doesn't he go to the Sydney Cricket Ground and fill it up? And we'll go out there and he can have a whole conversation. We'll listen, we'll all believe. And when he did it, as Yeshua 2,000 years ago, what was the response? Everybody believed? Almost nobody. Yeah, there was a real repulsion of and a refusal to admit that he was who he was. When the going got tough, the tough got going the wrong way. And that is exactly what happens every time with Moses, every time with Isaiah, every time with Yeshua, and it's still happening today. So when people say, I would believe if Jesus rocked up right now and said this, and I say, no, you wouldn't. You'd come up with some excuse to say it's an apparition, or it's a hologram, or he's just dressed up like Jesus, like in the movies, and I'm not so sure. Whatever the point is, whatever God does is designed that we might know him, and not that we might fancy his tricks, that we might know him personally. All right, verse 13. So at evening, it turns out that the salav, the quail, came up and covered the camp, and there's a layer of dew all over that. That's Sin Lamed Vav. When the layer of dew evaporated, actually Allah meaning to go up, behold, hine, on the surface there's a fine flake-like thing, fine as the frost on the ground. When they saw it, they said, what is it? Which became the name of it. I love that. Now, I heard an Aboriginal man tell me that the word kangaroo means, what is it? Now, I don't know if that's an anecdote or if it's true, but it makes sense to me that they would have looked at this thing that they'd never seen before and said, what is it? Kangaroo. And that stuck. And that's exactly what happened with this frosty coriander seed type thing, and said, Manu. Yeah, it's manna. That's it. Manna. That's what it means. What is it? Just what we read in verse 15. They didn't know what it was. Moses said, this is the lechem that the Lord has given you to eat. Well, it didn't look like bread. It looked like a frosty type stuff on the ground in the morning. That? You want me to eat that? What are you, nuts? What am I, a cow? I'm going to eat off the ground? This is what the Lord commanded. You gather it, and you put an omer apiece, and that's a tenth of an ephah, and it's just a particular measurement. So an omer apiece, according to the number of persons each of you has in his tent. And so everybody did. And if you're a single guy, you picked up a little bit, and if you're a family of 12, you picked up a lot of it. And amazingly, when they measured it, nobody had more than they needed. Nobody had less than they needed. Because God provides what we need, not what we want. He provides what we need, not what we want. And if you don't hear anything else tonight, you've heard it. That's it. That's the talk. He provides. So the sons of Israel did so, gathered much, some little, some much, and they found out, sure enough, that the people who had little didn't lack any, the people who had a lot didn't have any left over. Life was good. But he had said this in verse 19, don't leave any of it until morning, don't have leftovers, which is exactly what happened a month earlier with the Passover meal. No leftovers at the first Seder. But they did not listen to Moses. Oh, there's a new thing. I say sarcastically. That's not new at all, but it's regular with the Jewish people. We don't listen to Moses. And some left part of it until morning, so they thought they could refrigerate it. But it became wormy, became foul. Have you ever seen maggots go after some food? And it just starts, it looks pulsating. And it became foul. Ba'ash is the Hebrew. And Moses was angry with them. I mean, it's this horrible smell, horrible look. It's foul. It's as bad as you can get. And they gathered it every morning, every man as much as he should eat. When the sun grew hot, it would melt. So you had to have it in the quantity that Moses told us, and that's it. Then, on Friday morning, you go out to get yours. Take a second jar with you, because Saturday you're not going to do anything with it. You're not going to bake it. You're not going to boil it, which means they probably baked and boiled it in the days when they had it, Sunday through Thursday, which is why in the Jewish religion, you don't bake or boil food on the Sabbath because of this verse. And verse 23 is where you wanted me to say this is the first time the word Sabbath is used in the Bible. It's anticipated in the creation story that there's a day off, but it's not expressly communicated until Exodus 16. That there are going to be some regulations to it. And the idea of Shabbat is not yoshav, only to sit, but really it means to cease, to stop normal things and have a different kind of day. That's what Shabbat is about. It's not whether you can put on tefillin or not put on tefillin, whether you have to wear a tallis or don't get. It's about stopping your regular activities. That's all it is. If you're a worker 6 days, it means don't go to work on the seventh day. If you're not a worker, then you don't have to not go to work. You don't do that any other day. If you're retired, it doesn't mean you it just basically means stop. It doesn't say go to church. It doesn't say go to synagogue. It doesn't say go to temple. In fact, nowhere in the record of the Older Testament do we ever see Shabbat and worship in the same sentence. We don't see gather together as a big congregation there at the Mishkan. We never see that on Shabbat. What we do see is ceasing and obviously family time, right? Don't go out. What does it say? Get stuck in your tent and hang out. Verse 29, you're stuck there. Have a nice day. Remain, every man, and the word remain is yoshav, meaning to sit, to hang out. Every man in his place, really under his place. Let no man go out of his place on the seventh day. So the people rested on the seventh day. That's it. But some people, of course, tried to gather up some on the seventh day, verse 27, and they didn't find any. So Moses is mad at them. If you gathered too much on other days, or you tried to hoard it, or you tried to leave it overnight. So there's all kinds of ways to break the rule. But the rule was for what? That we might trust God. That's the rule. Verse 31, the house of Israel named it manna. The house of Israel named it man, and it was like coriander seed, white, tastes like wafers with honey. When I was a kid and I learned this portion in Cheder, I learned, there was this, do you remember the comic strip Little Abner? And it was a great cartoon with weird stuff. Well, one of the things they invented was the shmooze. And a shmoo looked like a bowling pin. And you could make it into anything you wanted. You could fry a shmoo and eat it. You could kick a shmoo and it was happy. Basically, it could be any toy or anything that you wanted. It's basically a child's happiness, really. When you take anything. Why this umbrella that you brought in tonight? We could make it into, a steak and egg dinner. We could make it into a football. We could make it into a diamond ring and give it to a girl. Any number of things. Well, that's the way the rabbi explained to our class that manna was. It would taste like anything you wanted. But that's not true, because the people will say, we still want something else. Nevertheless, I remember that like yesterday from the rabbi's teaching. So Moses said, this is what the Lord commanded, let an omer full of it be kept throughout your generations. So what did we do with this? We put it in what kind of jar? It's called a golden jar of manna. So the golden jar is going to be the pot in which this is preserved. And it is a great evidence of God's provision. Remember, we often take things that are designed for one thing and make it into something else. Moses' staff, Aaron's rod that budded. We're going to see all kinds of things that have purposes for a moment, and we're going to make it into something else. The snake that Moses is going to put up in the wilderness in chapter 21 of Numbers, when he does that and the people look up and live, centuries later, they bow down to this thing as if it's an idol. What is wrong with you people? What's wrong is we forget the original purpose of a thing, and we want to make it into something we can figure out. God has said clearly what this is for. Keep that jar so that the generations to come may know what? That God took us out, delivered us, freed us, fed us, that God is God. So that people might remember God, not so that people remember the tricks and activities of God. It's always about God personally. And anything less than that is, less than that. So the people ate manna 40 years almost to the day. Verse 35, until they ate manna, until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. Just like that, it's finished. And what did we eat when we went into Canaan?
Fields.
All the food that was out there. Yeah, there was plenty of food. Land flowing with milk and honey. The 7 fruits of the land of Israel. And yeah, we probably had, remember, we had animals that we took with us. We're going to sacrifice many of them in the wilderness. We're going to eat some of them. So there's plenty of abundant food. Well, that's chapter 16. What is it? It's about God providing what we need. And that is something on which you can hang your hat. It's something you can go to the floor about. He loves you. He provides for you freedom, personal relationship with Him, air, water, manna. What is that? What is it? Manna. That's it. What is it? And He will ever provide for us when we understand, when we don't understand. And this is something that is so comforting to me and to the family of Sean Trank, the young man who died, to the family of anyone who passes, anyone who's got a broken limb, anyone who's in hospital right now or who just went in and came out, any of us who've experienced situations that aren't not so nice. That's right, not so pleasant. When we think about it, how come they are doing better and how come we're trying to struggle and our lives are supposed to be better and He gives us what we need. And that is a statement of faith, not a statement of fatalism, but a statement of faith that our great God knows us, knows our situations, knows our very needs, and will provide. Amen?